You have two couples in the church, Mr. and Mrs. Big and Mr. and Mrs. Small. Two young couples, they met in the youth group and fell in love, and they got married. And Mr. and Mrs. Big says, hey, look, to live in Coral Springs here, it's going to cost us $450,000. We got to buy a house for $450,000. And so they go to the mortgage broker, and they get a nice little place, and it's about $4,500 a month of payment, okay? Now, it's okay. They're both working. It's a lot of money, but, they just got out of college, and they're not going to have family for about 40 years. So it's okay. But Mr. and Mrs. Small say, you know what? I don't think I want to strap myself with that type of heartache. I want to buy a little condo for like $75,000. $75,000? There's no condos for $75,000. You can't find anything for, it's going to be on the wrong side of the tracks. It's going to be a crack house. You don't want to live there, kiddos. It's going to be bad. Don't do it to yourself. God doesn't call you to do that. And they go, it's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to make a $4,500 a month payment. Well, why would somebody be that dumb? Well, our friends are making the same payment, and they're not going to be able to go out at night, so why should we just go out every night and say, hey, flaunt it? No, we're going to live the same way they do. Well, that's kind of weird. Oh, yeah, it's weird. And so what happens after 2 years of making $4,500 a month payment on a $75,000 crack house? What happens? What happens? Is it paid off? Bullet holes in the windows and all? And we tell ourselves, don't do it, it's bad, you're going to die. And after 2 years, they sell it to somebody else in the church for the same amount. And they take that amount and roll it into a place for $150,000. A couple blocks better, without bullet holes. And they continue to make the $4,500 a month payment. What happens after 2 years then? Are you tracking with me? Well, they got it paid off. And how many years do Mr. and Mrs. Big still have? 26 more years. Okay, that's the tale of the tape. So what's the deal? So then they sell that $150,000 place for $250,000. Or they sell it and they buy a $250,000 place. And then they make a $4,500 payment for 4 years. What happens after 4 years? It's paid off. You say, Kevin, you make it sound so easy. You see, the kids are sacrificing all this time. What if they want to have babies? They can't have babies in some of those houses. They're places that aren't allowed babies. No, you find a place that allows you to have a baby. It's okay. And you continue to make the $4,500 a month payment because why? You feel so bad for Mr. and Mrs. Big. And then what happens? About year 10, they move in close to the same neighborhood as Mr. and Mrs. Big. And then about 4 years later, what have they done? They paid that house off. Now, here's the tale of the tape. It took Mr. and Mrs. Small about 14 years to get in the same neighborhood that Mr. and Mrs. Big are in. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Small say, you know what? I can't just let my friends continue to make that payment. And we don't have a mortgage payment, but we could save it. Now, what happens when you save $4,500 a month times 12? Does anybody know the answer to that question? How much is that? It comes out to what, 60? 54,000? Do I hear 55? 55, 55, 55 in the back, 55, 55, 55. Do I hear 54, 54? 54, $54,000 in a year. How much after 16 years? We got any bean counters in the audience? It's a lot of money, somebody just said. Okay, 54,000 times 16 years is, all right. Wow, you have a mind like a calculator. I love that. I love that. Now listen, what about a little interest? 5% interest, you're up to $1 million. Okay, so the moral of the story is this. We got Mr. and Mrs. Big. They paid off their house in 30 years, and they had a mortgage burning party. Wasn't that great? And the pastor came over. Here's Pastor David in 30 years. He's in his walker, right? Yeah, right? And he's in Branson, Missouri, right? I'm opening for him in Branson. Like where Lawrence Welk used to be, right? Well, he's not there now. Now David is. And now he comes to the house, and he says, hey, I just want to congratulate you. I want to tell you that we're doing a church plant in your neighborhood. Would you like to embrace it? Mr. and Mrs. Big. And Mr. and Mrs. Big say, you don't understand, we just paid off our mortgage. Here's $4,500 a month. Pastor David says, whoa, are you sure you want to embrace this vision? Because it's a big vision. Oh yeah, God prepared us 30 years ago at this event. And then he goes across the street to Mr. and Mrs. Small. Here we go, right? Mr. and Mrs. Small, Yes. Pastor David here. We have a vision to do a church plant in your neighborhood. Would you like to embrace this vision? Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Small crying. We have $4,500 that was available, plus $1 million. Would you like it? Well, Pastor Dave, he has a heart attack. And fortunately, Mr. and Mrs. Small know CPR. Now, Mr. Small, he ain't going to do mouth-to-mouth. He ain't going to let his wife do it either. So Dave's up there in front of God going, did you see that, God? And God says, yeah, wasn't that awesome? God, send me back. Boom, he's back. He goes, well, what was that all about? You don't understand. You see, 30 years ago, we made a little sacrifice. Well, most people thought we lived in a crack house, but it really was kind of nice. Actually, it was easier to clean. Does anybody here remember living in a smaller place? And was it easier to clean or harder? Don't admit it. And they said, really, it wasn't a sacrifice. You see, the way we use God's money can impact eternity. The way we use God's money can either send people to heaven or not. Ooh, I'm not sure about that, Kevin. I mean, you put a lot of responsibility in, like, using money. I mean, it's not like it's God's or anything, sort of. Yeah. The way we use God's money, we are either honoring him or dishonoring. And we can either store up for ourselves incredible rewards or not.